Everybody knows the old dictum that you are what you eat, right? We teach that to kids, and generally, when we tell young children you are what you eat, it's sort of a shorthand for make good choices about food. Eat good food. If you eat healthy food, you will be healthy. If you eat junk food, your body will not be healthy, that kind of thing. And for young children, that's enough. At a deeper level, at some point, you learn in like high school biology class that in a lot more literal sense, we become what we eat, or rather what we eat becomes us. The things that we take into our bodies, those nutrients, those minerals come into our bodies and eventually go through all the cells in our body to build the material that is us. We don't often think about that. We sometimes talk about food like it's just fuel, like it's, gasoline running through the engine of a car or electricity running through a battery. But a fair amount of what we eat actually becomes us. The minerals in the milk that we drink become the calcium in our bones that builds our bones. The protein that we eat becomes muscle in our muscle cells. It's not just in and out like gasoline through an engine. We are literally made up of what we eat, and therefore it's important that you pay attention to what things we put inside our bodies. That idea of becoming, though, that's an important one, especially in light of the conversation we've been having all throughout this month of August in John's Gospel, in the 6th chapter of John, as Jesus talks about himself as the bread of life. Jesus gets increasingly literal, increasingly graphic even in the way he talks about being the bread of life. And this is the kind of thing that we sort of have to have moved from the shallow end to the deeper end of the pool here. Back at the beginning of this discourse, Jesus had just fed 5,000 people with 5 little loaves of bread and 2 fish, and Jesus just sort of makes an analogy. Just like you ate that bread, and just like God fed our ancestors in the wilderness with the manna, now I've come to feed you. I'm the bread of life. Okay, so far so good. But Jesus, this coming Sunday, doubles down and goes even further and says, no, I'm not just sort of talking ambiguously. I mean, you need to partake of my flesh, my blood. In language, it sounds an awful lot like what we think is happening, the way we talk at Holy Communion every Sunday when we gather around the bread and the cup, and we hear Jesus promise, this is my body, this is my blood. And that what happens in that moment is not only that we remember that Jesus did something for us on the cross a long time ago, not just a recollection of past events, but we dare to believe that Christ, who is present in that meal, present with us in the bread and the cup, comes to be in us, that we become filled with the presence of Christ, that this is ultimately what God's intention is for us. Not just to be people who retell stories about what Jesus did a long time ago, but that we be people filled with the presence of Christ. Years and years ago, I remember a young saint who was going through First Communion instruction, and we were talking about what we Lutheran Christians believe happens when we share this bread and drink this cup, and that it's not just about remembering that Jesus died on the cross, but about Jesus being with us. And this kid, he must have been in elementary school, he said, it's like a story that becomes a part of your body. And I love that. I love the idea that there's a story to what the meal of communion is. We remember what Jesus did at the cross. We remember Jesus' meals welcoming outcasts. We remember the stories around tables or God feeding the Israelites at the Passover meal and then with manna in the wilderness and freeing them from enslavement. We remember those things, but it's a story that becomes a part of our body. It's a living word that becomes a part of us. In other words, in a way very much similar to when I eat some food, it becomes a part of me, becomes who and what I am. When we partake of Jesus' body and blood at communion, in a very real, important sense, we become filled with the very presence of Christ, that God's goal is not just that we be people who know a story about Jesus, but that we become people who embody the very presence of Jesus for the sake of the world. In other words, God's a lot more interested in who we are becoming, what kind of people, and that we become people who reflect and inhabit Christ's own presence for the world. it's a lot messier. It's a lot more real. It's a lot more earthy to picture that we're fed with the very presence, the body, the blood of Christ. But our faith has never been one to shy away from the real, the gritty, the messy, the earthy. To be a Christian isn't just to be people who know interesting ideas or tell ancient stories, but that we're people who are fed with Jesus' own presence. That Jesus really comes to be with us and is willing to show up in ordinary stuff like bread and the cup. That's the conversation we're having this coming Sunday as we dig further into John 6 and Jesus' bread of life discourse and talk about what it really means to be people who are what we eat, who become what we receive, the body of Christ for the world. Join us for that conversation this Sunday. See you then.